How often do you let how you feel limit what it is that you do? Maybe fixating on stress, worry, or fear is preventing you from achieving something today. I call these unpleasant feelings emotional discomfort. In our society, it's normalized and even suggested that we manipulate our emotional discomfort using coping strategies to try and mask how we feel. But this leaves us lacking confidence and self-reliance. Now, of course, we're wired to protect ourselves from any discomfort that could potentially be harmful. But too often we treat unpleasant emotions like a puzzle we have to solve in order to complete a task or reach a goal. Perhaps what is most harmful is that we see emotional discomfort as the problem, when the only problem is our relationship to it. If we can learn to let go of this resistance to our emotional discomfort and accept it as it comes, we will see radical transformation in the way we live our lives. My own journey with accepting emotional discomfort began 2 years ago. One day, out of the blue, I became extremely nauseous, and I had never experienced this sensation before without some obvious external reason, and so I panicked. Day after day, I kept getting nauseous, and I began experiencing new symptoms like digestive issues, trouble breathing, intense intrusive thoughts, and bizarre fears. So naturally, I started calling doctors and seeing therapists and counselors who told me my body was perfectly healthy. I thought I had to be going crazy. At my last hopeless visit, my doctor told me that what I was experiencing could be generalized anxiety. I thought, there's no way anxiety is causing this. So I left, and I still had no answers. I began avoiding everything that triggered these uncomfortable sensations in me. I was afraid to do anything out of the fear of what my body might do next. By the time I stopped counting, I had experienced over 80 physical and cognitive symptoms. In just a few short weeks, I had lost nearly 30 pounds. I was mentally paralyzed by the fear of my own body, and this fear took control of my life. Everyday tasks became my greatest challenges. I isolated myself because being alone was easier than being in a room full of people who didn't understand. No one had answers, and no one could comprehend this debilitating reality I was living. My health was deteriorating, and I was at a dead end as to why or what to do. A few months later, I stumbled across a program that talked about nervous system sensitization, or an overactive anxiety response. I had found people who were experiencing similar symptoms to mine, and others who would overcome them. Out of the 40 million adults facing anxiety disorders in the US today, only 18% fall into this high-functioning category. So when this program told me that recovery was possible, I had to join. I discovered that my initial nausea was, in fact, an anxiety response caused by my inability to acknowledge the stress I had been experiencing in a toxic relationship. My active avoidance and denial of the stress conveyed to my sympathetic nervous system that I was in danger, triggering my fight or flight response. This survival response produced stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol to protect me from danger, preparing me to fight an enemy or run from a wild animal. With no real danger, these stress hormones had begun to burn off through physical and cognitive symptoms like nausea and intrusive thoughts. What was keeping me in this heightened state of anxiety was my fighting and fear of the symptoms. For months, I only wore loose pants because I was afraid that a tight waistband would upset my stomach and make me sick. I never left my bedroom without a purse full of peppermints and gum in case I began to feel nauseous. I avoided music, one of my favorite things in the world, because it spiked my heart rate, reminding me of panic, causing me to panic. My fighting and fear of the symptoms themselves reaffirmed to my nervous system that there was a danger I needed to protect myself from, continually activating my fight or flight response. The more I feared my symptoms, the more long-term symptoms my body produced. I was no longer experiencing anxiety the way a typical body shifts into its fight or flight mechanism when in danger, like protecting you from an oncoming car or jumping out of the way when a glass dish is about to fall to the floor. My nervous system was stuck in this state, ready to fight off danger when there was none. I had unknowingly taught my brain what to prioritize and where to place its energy on the very thing making my anxiety worse, which was anxiety itself. My recovery followed the approach of Dr. Claire Weekes. Dr. Weekes was an Australian general practitioner and a pioneer of long-term anxiety recovery, who believed that if a patient with anxiety simply faced and accepted their anxiety, they would see it was possible to come out the other side. The goal of anxiety recovery is not to get rid of the symptoms, but to change your relationship to them. And as a result, the nervous system will regulate on its own. It's this great paradox where in order to fix your anxiety, you have to do nothing to fix your anxiety. A highly sensitized person has subconsciously developed a habit of resisting their anxiety symptoms by fighting them. As I learned the hard way, any act of avoidance or coping to try and get rid of the symptoms just reinforces the notion that there is some danger to fight. To break this cycle, a highly sensitized person has to develop a new response to their anxiety symptoms. By continually letting go of this resistance behavior, accepting their anxiety symptoms, and re-engaging with the task at hand, the amygdala, the fear center of our brain, begins to catch on. This new response communicates to the amygdala that there is no danger, and that what we choose to focus on instead is more important than the perceived threat. This response allows the nervous system to return to a state of rest and digest. Now, acceptance doesn't mean liking the symptom, and it doesn't mean forcing yourself not to hate it. It simply means realizing something is out of your control at the moment and letting it exist without interfering. Applying this response to anxiety through repetition and patience creates new neural pathways to form a new subconscious reaction to the symptoms. The brain finally understands that anxiety, its own mechanism used to fight danger, is not dangerous. So for months, I applied this acceptance response to my anxiety symptoms. I stopped waiting to feel better in order to start living. I began living my life again, accepting my symptoms and carrying them with me. It was the hardest thing I've ever had to do, but I was healing. As I was recovering, I began to trace back this pattern of resistance in my life, and I realized that I had always resisted. I had always forced myself to be happy when I was sad, or became frustrated that I felt frustrated. Pushing away discomfort was the only way I knew how to handle it. And it only took my focus off the moment in front of me. I started to become aware in my relationships and interactions of how people handled situations and how they talked about their feelings and experiences. I was shocked to find that even those without anxiety disorders were often limited by their emotional discomfort. Studies have shown that we tend to hold a negative bias towards the beliefs we have in our own abilities. I found that this emotional discomfort, rooted in self-doubt, was the reason so many of us refrain from the actions we want to take. I was curious and began applying this acceptance response to discomfort in my life that wasn't necessarily caused by anxiety. My perspective on life and on myself completely shifted. The same response used to regulate a sensitized nervous system can be used to rewire our relationship to our emotions. Just as a highly sensitized person needs to develop a new response to their anxiety symptoms and let go of trying to control them, a person who isn't sensitized can apply the same response to the discomfort they face in their daily lives. Maybe you haven't left an unhealthy environment because you're afraid to navigate on your own. Maybe you haven't started your dream project because you don't want to feel uncertain. To avoid an uncomfortable feeling, we avoid the action entirely, putting a limit on what we achieve. Resistance removes us from the present and places our attention and energy into something we can't control. But acceptance allows us to take that value that we place in emotional discomfort and give that value back to the present moment. As with any habit, accepting emotional discomfort takes consistency and patience. But the more we face discomfort, the more we can begin to master this concept. By training our brains on what to regard as important, emotional discomfort begins to hold less weight. Facing discomfort is simply part of the human experience. And if we can learn to coexist with it, we no longer give it the power to dictate what it is that we do. If we can create a beautiful environment for our thoughts, our emotions, and our feelings to exist in our minds, we will have the time, energy, and courage to fully experience the life in front of us. If you spent less time involved in your discomfort, what might your life look like? Thank you.